You're my heart.
This is an audio-visual story of a heart-wrenching tale set in the 18th century. Get ready to embark on the continuing journey of love, sacrifice and heartache of the unbreakable bond of true love. Episode 6, When Greed Meets Truth and Love. In Hong Kong, Charlie has been enjoying his new life with his family working for his father-in-law. He has never felt so alive with life and enjoys his time with his wife and daughters. It is Sunday evening, and that is parlour game night for Charlie and the family. They were all playing a game called Pin the Tail on the Donkey. It was Charlie's turn, and one of his daughters placed the blindfold on over his eyes, then turned him round 3 times and said, "Go." Everyone was shouting, "Go straight, go left, turn around." Everyone was laughing and having fun, until Charlie tripped over and knocked over a large vase that belonged to his mother. It went down with a loud crash. Charlie felt bad when he took off the blindfold. He asked the girls to go into the other room so as not to cut their feet on the broken pottery. Charlie started to pick up the broken bits of pottery when he noticed a document hidden in the base of the vase. The base had a false base built onto the original one. He picked it up and began to read. It took a few minutes before Charlie realized what it was and how important and even dangerous it was to have such important information. Charlie called his wife into the room and showed her the document. It was so shocking that she had to sit down for fear of fainting. "You have to get the document to England and give it to your Uncle Carl in the palace. He will know what to do," Kate said worriedly. "I know, my love. I will leave tonight on the ship going to Southampton with its cargo of silk and tea," replied Charlie. "Then hurry, my love. Just pack a small trunk. I will arrange the carriage to take you to the dock." "Thank you, my love." Charlie left Hong Kong bound for a long trip to England. At Oakfield Manor, Sir Arthur was holding a meeting with the other 11 members of their elite gentlemen's club. "Gentlemen, we have much to discuss today, so it would be appreciated if we could agree more without objections. First, have we got all the paperwork for our proposals to the King of Spain when he arrives in 3 weeks?" asked Sir Arthur. "Yes, and we have the proposal for the use of the docks in Puerto Rico in exchange for private military firepower at Spain's disposal. Next, we have the trade agreement for sugar from Cuba, giving Spain 2 full cargoes of sugar for every 10 ships with sugar we bring to England. It is a winning situation for Spain, as it will cost them nothing to ship the sugar," said Pete Turnbull. "Make those 2 ships the smallest one we have," replied Sir Arthur. "Next is the difficult one. It's to allow us to mine for gold and silver in the Americas, giving Spain a quarter of gold and silver mined. I'm not too bothered with that one at the moment. I believe after making a deal with the Colombian government, we will have a ready-made gold mine, one my traitor to the Crown's son found, along with the coffee trade," said Sir Arthur with a smug look on his face. He then turned to his friends from the bank and asked, "Are they about to secure Edward's money for the government, meaning us as a form of forfeit? Now Edward is a wanted man." They all looked at each other and then at the ground, waiting for one of them to have the courage to tell Sir Arthur the truth. One man stood up and with his head lowered said, "It is not possible to obtain Edward's money." This made Sir Arthur slump back in his chair. He looked up and said, "For what reason?" He was told that even though Edward had an account with the bank, he never actually used it, so that makes it impossible to take control of his account. "Where is Edward's money? It has got to be somewhere," shouted Sir Arthur. "We just don't know. We can only think he has put it in another country," said Pete Turnbull. "You had all better find out what Edward has done with all that gold and money if you want our club to stay untouchable." The meeting went on far into the night and early morning. Everyone was tired and went to their rooms about 2 a.m. Pete Turnbull went downstairs to the main kitchen to help himself to food and drink before sleeping in the stable hand's room. He was sitting by the fire, too drunk to get up, and not aware he was talking to himself. Mary walked in to find Turnbull drunk. She walked over to him, took the bottle away from him, called the butler to help her get Turnbull to his room. All the while Turnbull was talking to himself, unaware anyone was with him. They placed Turnbull on his bed and left him to sleep it off. Lord Kemp and the captain were in London. They were meeting 5 members from the House of Lords who were putting money into Sir Arthur's pocket to obtain the land in Norfolk and trade with Spain. These men were not from Sir Arthur's gentlemen's club. Lord Kemp has known them all since childhood, and so he knows they can be trusted. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming and for making the time out of your busy schedule to meet with me," announced Lord Kemp. "When we received your message about a meeting, we had to come especially as you mentioned. It would be in our interest and our reputation to meet," said Lord Hatfield. "Also, if our old friend calls a meeting, it must be important. As we all know, "You would not hold a meeting unless it affects us and the country," said Lord Berkeley. "You may not know, but myself and Lord Peterson have removed our money and support from Lowings a few months ago, for reasons I am about to tell you. There is also a very urgent and important piece of information you need to know, which, if and when it comes to light, will affect you all while you are still associated with Lowings." Everyone gave each other a look as if they had heard a ghost story. Lord Kemp then asked them to listen to what the captain had to say. The captain's reputation is well known for being the best at finding out the facts and truth of any situation, which is why the Prime Minister and the palace trust his judgment. The captain began to tell them about why Lord Kemp and Lord Peterson stopped backing Lowings and his get-rich plans, and how it all started with what happened to Miss Isabella and Lowings at the dinner party. Isabella is someone they all knew as Lady Margaret's companion. The captain then went on to talk about the death of Lady Margaret and the suspicious death of Lowings' wife, how Lowings obtained the land in Norfolk and Lady Margaret's home and lands by using the bank and government to do so. Everyone listened very carefully, especially after the captain told them about what Sir Arthur had done to his son and why Charlie left the family home to live in Hong Kong. The 5 men were divided into anger and revenge, but agreed they had been fooled by the charms of a snake. The captain calmed them down and then began to finish what he wanted to say. "Gentlemen, I have some good news for you, but first I need to know if you will stop supporting Lowings now you know the facts. They all agreed they would blacklist Lowings from their list and make life as a Member of Parliament difficult, but they have between them given a fortune to Sir Arthur, and it will affect them badly." It was then the captain pulled out one of the documents Edward gave him. "This is an official document signed and sealed by Henry James, the Attorney General. It states that I, William Waterman aka, the captain, have sole charge of all the monies now, and in the future of one, to use as the captain sees fit until such time I, Edward Lowings, can return to a normal life in England." The captain then went on to say that he would not only give the money back to the 5 men that Sir Arthur tricked into his plan, but he would double it on condition that they would wait for Lord Kemp's message and not do anything to make Lowings suspect anything is wrong. The captain told them to leave the money they gave Lowings as it was and not ask for it back. That way Lowings would think he still had them in the palm of his hand. They all agreed to go along with the plan Lord Kemp and the captain had to bring down Sir Arthur Lowings. Isabella and John departed on a ship bound for England, unaware there was another ship sailing into the harbour with men sent by Pete Turnbull on behalf of Sir Arthur, with the sole purpose of removing Edward from getting in the way of Sir Arthur's plan for wealth and power. In other words, with Sir Arthur's mind set only on greed as he has done for years, son or no son, Edward has to die. John went on deck only to see Isabella staring out to sea, as if in a daze. "Are you not feeling well, Miss Isabella?" asked John. Isabella turned, and it was obvious she had been crying. "Edward will be fine. He has the professor with him." "I know. I'm just feeling a little sad after I read the rest of the letter. Lady Margaret said in the letter that from the moment I was born, her brother was so happy and excited he had a daughter. He promised to bring me up well and always provide for my mother and myself. It broke not only my mother's heart, but Lady Margaret's heart as well when my father died. It was after my father's death and the death of my mother that Lady Margaret vowed to give me all the love I would have had from both of them. I am still in shock remembering that after all these years, the large portrait of Lord Oakfield hanging in the main hall, I used to spend hours looking at and thinking I wish he was here to be with Lady Margaret. Now I find out he was my father all along, and I wish he was here even more, so I could just hold him to say thank you for loving me and my mother. All I have is this ring to remember him by," said Isabella in a sad voice. John reassured Isabella that everything would be fine. Many people want truth and justice not just for her, but for everyone that Lowings has destroyed along his way to power and wealth. Edward and the professor were preparing a fishing boat after doing some repairs for one of the local fishermen, when one of the farmers approached the professor, shook his hand, and then leaned forward and whispered something to the professor. "What was that all about?" asked Edward jokingly. "Good news. We have been invited to a carnival which means free food and rum tomorrow night," said the professor in a jolly voice. "Why the whispers then?" asked Edward. This made the professor burst out laughing. "It's because you are a man of breeding, and he felt it was not his place to speak directly to you." "That is strange, because I talk with Billy all the time when getting the best price for his plantain and banana. He never has a problem talking to me then," snapped Edward. "That's farm business and different from social, in Billy's way of thinking," replied the professor. He is set in his ways." Edward smiled and said he knows a lot of people like that in England. The two men carried on working on the boat before putting it back into the water, ready for the fishermen. Later that day, after they had eaten, the professor asked Edward to be ready to leave early in the morning for a trip to Port Morant so they could get fresh supplies from the early overnight trade ships. Edward, joking, said he would not bother to change and just sleep as he is. The professor said that was a good idea, he would do the same. Edward looked surprised at the reply, considering he was only joking with the professor, but could tell he was serious about not changing. It was 3:30 in the morning when both men left for the port. The professor told Edward to rest while the sea was calm. He would wake him when they were within sight of the port. Edward did not need to be told twice he was tired after worrying all night about Isabella. Power and greed may break many lives, but never the unbreakable bond of true love.
I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old. Please tell me you'll stay.
The men sent to Jamaica to deal with Edward are now in Kingston, meeting with one high-ranking government member on the island and an old friend of Sir Arthur's. They had a sealed letter from Pete Turnbull to pass over to Sir Arthur's contact as soon as they arrived on the island. Now, with the location of Edward, they made their way to be near where Edward lives, so they could observe and pick the right moment to get the job done. The professor and Edward loaded the boat with fresh supplies and started to make their way back home. When Edward started to laugh to himself, the professor asked, "What has come into your mind to make you burst out laughing in such a way?" Edward began to talk about why it was a good idea they still to wear the same clothes from yesterday. The professor said they will be doing that a lot from now on, sleeping in their day clothes. Edward looked confused and asked why. The professor said, "Billy did not just tell me about the carnival, he also told me about some men who arrived on the island a few days ago. He was loading his cargo on the ship as the men went past him. Billy said that one of the men he recognized and said, 'That man was here 2 years ago when there was a fire at a Spanish farmer's house that killed everyone and just happened to be the largest farm on the island. It was reported as an accident, which is strange as the farm and land were soon owned by your father and one of the government men over here.'" Edward looked disgusted and angry at the same time. He has never really been a father to Charlie and myself for years. He has always been distant from being anything that resembles a father, only when it is in his interest. I now understand why my mother used to say, as long as she is alive, she will protect us from evil. So what you are saying is that these men are up to no good being here. This is why we have to be ready. I believe they are here for you, Edward, and not in a good way. We have the advantage. We know they are here, and they don't know you are not alone. Once we get back, we need to prepare. They will be watching the hut, so I will need to do something, which you must play along with." The professor began to tell Edward his plan. It is now 10 days before the King of Spain's visit with Queen Victoria, and also his visit to Oakfield Manor for a few days, while he is in England. Sir Arthur was very pleased with the way things were going his way. "Do I need to arrange an accident for your other son, Charlie?" asked Pete Turnbull. "No, he is the timid one. He cannot harm us or me. He is even scared of his own shadow," laughed Sir Arthur. "Now, have we got everything ready to make our fortune when the king arrives?" asked Sir Arthur. "Yes, sir. Everything is in place and ready, and everyone knows what to do on the day." "Good. What about the... That's strange, I know what I want to say, but cannot for the life of me remember what the word is," said Sir Arthur in an agitated voice. "Maybe you are overtired, sir. You have been working extra hard to get this far over the last few months." "I think you may be right, Turnbull. With all the business of the land in Norfolk, getting rid of that stubborn Lady Margaret, that opium-head Thompson, the arranged marriage between Edward and Lord Kemp's daughter, which Edward rejected. Yes, I am not surprised. I'm tired. Now tell me, have we got everything ready for the king's visit?" Turnbull looked confused and said, "Sir, I think you need to rest. We only just spoke about that a few minutes ago." "Did we, I don't recall, but I do feel tired. I will lie down for a while." Isabella and John will arrive in England in 3 days, unaware that Edward's life is in danger. Charlie will arrive in 8 days. Both Isabella and Charlie hold information that can destroy Sir Arthur and his plans. Charlie has been doing a lot of thinking on the voyage to England, and now realizes just how evil his father is, and what he will do to achieve his ambition for power and wealth. He has had time to fully understand the importance of the letter and the significance of what was written in it. The fact that the document had individual seals by each signature made it very important and very dangerous, not only to himself, but to anyone with it in their possession. Each name on the list represents each member of Sir Arthur's Gentlemen's Club, including Sir Arthur. It also has information on what they have done in the past to gain their position in life and what lengths they did to achieve it. Charlie made a note of each one and found the crimes they had done ranged from blackmail, stealing from people's deposits of gold and diamonds, and forcing people out of their homes for their houses or farms, among other despicable tricks. It was his father's he was more interested in. It just said, "I, Arthur Lowings, feel responsible for my house burning down and for the death of my wife in said fire. I know she did not suffer. I had given her something to make her fall into a heavy sleep." Charlie remembered his mother telling him not long after Edward's second birthday, when Charlie was 11. His mother said his father was married when his mother and father first met, but married within a year from that first meeting after his father divorced his first wife, to be with her. Now Charlie has the evidence that his evil father probably killed his first wife to marry his mother. Charlie has a sickening feeling about what may have happened to his mother 23 years ago. It has been over 3 weeks since the men sent by Pete Turnbull arrived in Jamaica. Edward has played his part as a master to the professor, who was acting the part of a man suffering from the result of war, and that has made him behave like a child. Edward was sitting on a log watching the professor play in the surf on the beach. Now and then the professor would take a seashell to show Edward. To anyone watching, it was like watching a child playing on the beach. Each time the professor showed Edward a seashell, he was telling Edward who was watching them from the tree line, or when the men watching them changed places. It was early evening when Edward called the professor to have his supper. Edward stood in the doorway, watching a grown man pretend he was riding a horse to the hut. Edward could not help himself but give a little laugh as the professor rode the horse into the hut. Once inside, the professor told Edward that the men would strike tonight. He saw them all gathered in the tree line carrying weapons. "You know what to do, Edward?" said the professor. "Yes, and I am ready." "Good. Remember what you learned from the tribes in the jungles of the Americas, and what I have shown you. Stay in the shadows as much as you can." After they had something to eat, the professor told Edward to rest while he could. He will make a few childish noises now and then to keep the men thinking Edward and the professor are still awake. It was about 4 in the morning when the professor woke Edward and also stopped making childish sounds and blew the lantern out. It was only a matter of a few minutes when the door burst open and 3 of the men charged into the room, only to find no one there. One of the men ran out and shouted to the others near the hut to look around as no one was inside. He turned round to check inside again, and once inside, he along with the others started to take the hut apart, looking for Edward and the professor. One of the men saw a tall cabinet and pulled it over to look behind it. But as he did that, a large jar that was on top of it tipped over and covered all 3 of the men in oil and honey. They stood there cursing and laughing at the same time, and then suddenly one of the men dropped his lantern when it caught fire. But before any of them could do anything, they were engulfed in flames along with everything in the hut. They tried to run to the sea to put out the flames, but it was low tide and too far away. One by one they fell to the ground screaming in agony until there was silence. Edward and the professor got out of the hut by going under the floor and then headed to where the men were standing in the tree line. Quietly the professor whispered, "3 down, 4 to go. We can make our way to the shoreline further up the headland to use the fishing boat to make our way round to the village." The professor could see the other men running around searching for them by the fire from the hut. "Let's move now while they are still looking for us." They got to the beach and were making their way to the boat when there was a loud crack sound. Edward turned round and saw the professor on the ground. He ran back to help. The professor had been shot in the back. Edward helped him up and started to move as fast as they can to the boat. Edward could see the men were gaining on them. As they got to the boat, the professor shouted to Edward to get in and started to push the boat out. "Take the boat round the headland as we planned. Get to the village, you will be safe." "Get in," shouted Edward. But it was too late. The professor gave one last big push and the boat was already on the waves. Edward rowed the boat as hard as he could, so the boat would not get pulled back to shore. He looked up and saw the professor fire 2 pistols. One man fell to the ground, the other staggered back for a moment, then continued to run at the professor. Edward watched as 2 men ran at him laying on the ground. It was just then the boat went past the headland when Edward heard 2 or more shots. Thinking the worst, Edward rowed harder to get help. He heard another louder crack and then fell back into the boat, feeling a sharp, burning pain in his shoulder. He had been shot by one of the men who made his way to the headland. He tried to row, but after a short while Edward passed out. Edward eventually woke up and looked up to see Billy and a woman tending the wound on his shoulder. "What happened? How did I get here?" Edward was still weak from losing so much blood and tried to get up, but fell back again. Edward said in a weak voice, "Billy, you have to find out what happened to the professor." Billy looked up and said they would find him. Billy went on to say, "You are not ready to move anywhere for now. You lost a lot of blood. You were very lucky. If the fishermen had not gone out to fish early this morning, we would never have found you, drifting in the sea." Isabella and John arrived in England and made their way to London. It was late afternoon when they arrived at the captain's hotel. They waited in the lobby until he arrived. "Miss Isabella, John, what brings you back to England? Is Edward and the professor with you?" said a surprised captain. "We need to talk. There has been a development that could be the start of Lowing's downfall. Edward and the professor thought it was better we returned alone," replied John. "Please let us talk about it in private." The captain went to have a word with the hotel manager and returned within a few minutes with 2 keys. "I have arranged for your luggage to be placed in your rooms." "Thank you, Captain," replied Isabella. Then all 3 proceeded to go to the captain's suite. Once inside, John handed the letter and documents over to the captain to read, while John and Isabella went to their rooms to change. It was an hour later when both Isabella and John returned to the captain's room. "Well, what do you think?" asked John. "Well, it's official. Miss Isabella is now the lady of Oakfield Manor, and as such is entitled to return to her home. Soon." "Soon? Why not now, Captain? Why wait? I want that devil of a man out of the house," said Isabella in a frustrated voice. "Lowings will soon find a way around it all, and with the bank and government behind him, you could lose everything. We need to play this smart, and we need the help of someone who could do that. It's late, and you both need to rest after your trip, Miss Isabella. You can take the main suite. John and I will be in the adjoining room for your protection." "But we have our rooms across the hall from you, Captain. I don't want to inconvenience you," replied Isabella. John explained to Isabella that it would be safer if she stayed here and told her if anyone in the hotel was working for Sir Arthur. They would find you easily, but not if you are here. Isabella agreed. John went to fetch their luggage from the rooms, while the captain showed Isabella what would now be her room. John returned with the luggage, and then he and the captain went into the adjoining room. In the morning they sat talking about how life was in Jamaica and how Isabella felt. Now she knew who her father was. It was 10 a.m. sharp when there was a knock at the door. "Let them in, John. That will be Carl and George." He opened the door. "Come in, gentlemen. I believe you have already met Miss Isabella." "I have not had the pleasure of meeting Miss Isabella, but I am very happy to finally meet you," said George. "Hello, George. I've heard so much about you, and all good, I hasten to add," laughed Isabella. The captain then stepped forward and gave the letter and documents to Carl. As he sat down to read, he noticed Isabella's ring. "May I have a closer look at the ring on your finger, Miss Isabella?" asked Carl. "The ring belonged to Lady Margaret's brother, and was given to me a few days after we returned from the Americas, along with a letter with those documents. Lady Margaret asked me to keep them in a safe place until the day came Lady Margaret left this world. I lost my memory of the ring and documents after I hit my head on a table when I confronted Edward's father in the study of Lady Margaret," Isabella replied. Carl inspected the ring and recognized it straight away, and the importance and meaning it carried, but did not mention it to Isabella. Carl looked up at Isabella and said that it was a beautiful family ring, and she must be very proud. "Yes, I am very proud to hold something Lady Margaret was very proud of and loved so dearly." It was almost an hour before Carl had finished reading everything in the documents and the letter. He looked up and said in a soft voice, "Miss Isabella, may I take this letter and this document with me? I would like to show someone the information." It was at that moment that the captain stepped forward and gave Carl 2 documents bearing the seal of the Colombian government. "These belong to Edward. It is written in Spanish, mixed with some Latin. It shows that Edward is the only person allowed to mine for gold and trade coffee from Colombia for the next 30 years, said the captain. As soon as Carl saw the seals, he knew who to deal with and what to do to help Isabella and Edward with their situation. He got up and put the documents he was taking into a leather case, turned and said, "Captain and Miss Isabella, please stay here until I or John return." John looked surprised. "Why me and not the captain?" asked John. "I need you to meet someone, and I want you to tell them exactly what happened after Lady Margaret and Isabella returned from the Americas. You have first-hand knowledge of what happened at the dinner party and who is behind it all," replied Carl. The two men left the room and within 20 minutes arrived at a large grand house. Carl spoke to someone at the entrance to the house. Within a few minutes, the man returned and told the guard to open the gate. "The Prime Minister will meet you in the study." Carl and John followed the man into the study. After a few minutes, the Prime Minister entered the room. "Gentlemen, please be seated. Now, what brings the Queen's German advisor here today?" "I have some disturbing news that could rock the very foundation of not only your government but the whole country," replied Carl. The Prime Minister leaned forward, placed his arms on his desk and said, "I have a feeling this is not going to be a normal day. Please carry on and tell me what you have that is so important." Carl asked John to tell the Prime Minister the story of Lady Margaret, Isabella and Edward, Sir Arthur, and all the information John and the captain have found over the last few months. After John had spoken and told everything in fine detail, Carl handed the documents over. It was late afternoon when the Prime Minister had read everything, making notes as he did so. When he had finished, he looked up and said, "This is very bad and needs to be dealt with. But how and in what way can we stop this madness of this devil Arthur Lowings? I know I cannot just confront him with all this, not without solid evidence. He holds many politicians and lords in his pocket and could even find a way to remove me from office." John passed over a letter and a document from the captain. Carl looked at John surprised. He had no idea John had those documents. John went on to explain to both of them that the captain had prepared for such a day as this. "In your hand, you are holding the letter written by Arthur Lowings, saying he wanted this person to arrange the death of Lady Margaret, so he could then take control of Lady Margaret's estate on behalf of the government and the bank, and that he probably had his wife, Edward's mother, killed to gain her assets in Germany and control the family's money. The letter is from the captain with his outlines for a plan to bring Lowings to his knees and restore order in Parliament and the Bank of England. The Queen has trusted the captain for information for many years. Regarding the safety of the Empire, I feel we should take a look at his plans. Gentlemen, we're in for a long night. Let us continue after we have freshened up and have a meal, as it is getting late, and if you don't mind, I would like to have the captain join us." Carl looked up, said, "With due respect, sir, I don't believe it is wise to leave Miss Isabella alone, as she is the one in the most danger. Once Lowings finds out she is married to Edward and is the rightful owner of Oakfield Manor, I fear the worst will happen." "Very well then, we shall have them both join us. The captain can join us here in the study, and Miss Isabella can be entertained by my daughter Helen, who has just returned for a holiday away from her duties at Newnham College in Cambridge." Isabella and the captain arrived at the house at 7 in the evening. After the introductions were done, Isabella went with Helen to the parlour, while the men went into the study, for a long night of working on a plan to destroy everything Arthur Lowings had built, without embarrassing the government or the crown. It has been 3 days since Edward and the Professor were attacked that night, and since then, Edward has been recovering well. He was sitting on the porch when Billy arrived after going to the burnt-out hut that was once Edward and Isabella's home. "Well, did you find the Professor?" asked Edward. "Our friends in your village had gathered all the bodies together after they went to help with the fire. The Professor was not among them. We believe his body must have been washed out to sea," replied Billy. "How many are dead?" "4. The other 3 are either dead and washed out to sea with the Professor or still alive. But there was one not on the beach. He was on the headland around the bay. It was the one who shot me. So we can assume one of the men is still alive," replied Edward. "What will you do now, Master Edward? You can stay here for as long as you wish. You know that you are welcome to stay." "Thank you, Billy. I will need to heal properly and work out a plan." Edward got up to return to his bed. As he sat down, he heard a familiar voice from the window. That's typical. The gentry lay in bed all day while others work hard for a living. Edward turned and was shocked to see the Professor standing at the window, covered in blood and in a bad way. He called out to Billy to rush to the window outside to help the Professor. Billy and 2 men helped the Professor into the room, laid him down, and Billy's wife fetched water and clean cloth for his wounds. Billy told the men to find the doctor in town and to tell him it's the Professor who needs help. "How bad is it, Billy?" asked Edward. Billy checked the Professor's wounds and said, It was lucky the bullet went right through the lower side of the back. The knife wounds will heal quickly, but it is the wound in the stomach that can be a problem," the professor said as he looked up. "Well, I have had worse, but I am not as bad as the two who were on the beach trying to finish me off." Edward looked at the professor with a puzzled look. "I saw you on the ground, and the two of them were almost on top of you. I heard shots as the boat went round the headland. I guess they had finished you off." The professor looked Edward in the eye and said, "Never underestimate a wounded man on the ground. I let them get close enough to me so I could finish them off at close quarters with my knife and last loaded pistol." "I should have known you would never give up a fight, wounded or not," said Edward. "There is still one left, the one who shot me from the headland." "Aye, I know, he is a slippery one, that's for sure. I would guess he has reported back to the government house in Kingston and trying to muster more men to finish us off. But if it is a messy business, the government man will not have anything to do with it, as it looks bad on him if the people in England find out that a man of stature such as you, Edward, has been hunted down and killed. It looks bad in the morning newspapers when one is having breakfast. It spoils the appetite," chuckled the professor. The doctor arrived and attended to the wounds, gave Billy some pills to help relieve the pain and an ointment for the wounds, and told Billy to change the dressing every 4 hours. The next morning, Edward and the professor were still resting when Billy came in and said that the man who was still alive was the same man who burned down the farm that killed the Spanish farmer and his family. "Where is he?" asked Edward. "He was in the next village asking if anyone had seen you or knew where you were," replied Billy. "He is desperate, in fear for his own life for failing to finish the job," said the professor. Little did anyone know that very man was watching them from the hilltop, and he was not alone.
I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old. Please tell me you'll stay.